Welcome to Town Square. I'm your host, Dawn Becker. Town Square is where we discuss important issues to help better understand the problem and explore solutions. Our topic today is Social Security. Will it be there in the future? Some say major changes are needed, but others say the crisis is exaggerated. Today we discuss the present and the future of Social Security. With me are my guests, Nancy Altman, co-chair of the Strengthen Social Security campaign, which is comprised of over 300 of the nation's leading aging, labor, women's, consumer, and many other organizations. Diane Lim Rogers, chief economist at the Concord Coalition, a nonpartisan organization that uses a grassroots strategy to promote fiscal responsibility. Eugene Sterling, Institute Fellow and Richard Fisher Chair at the Urban Institute, a nonpartisan organization that conducts research and educates Americans on issues to foster sound public policy and effective government. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me today in the studio.
Thanks for having us.
To start, here's a brief overview of Social Security. While Social Security provides retirement, disability, and survivor benefits, for this show we're going to be focusing on the retirement program. If you work, money is probably taken out of your paycheck for Social Security. For the most part, money workers pay now goes to support current retirees with the promise that the next generation will pay for current workers when they retire. This system has been in place for the past 76 years, and for most seniors, Social Security is the major source of income. However, Social Security is now paying more in benefits than it collects in tax contributions. Without changes at the current rate of payout, the money paid into the Social Security Trust Fund, which is roughly $2.5 trillion, will be used up by 2036. After that, payroll tax contributions will be enough to pay about 3/4 of expected benefits. And we'll talk more about the trust fund in a little bit. So that's a brief overview. You know, people hear a lot of things, and the younger generation especially doesn't have a lot of confidence in the future of Social Security. So my question is, will Social Security as we know it likely be there in the future?
I think the answer is clearly yes. We're talking about some moderate imbalances in the Social Security trust funds, but we're also talking about imbalances in a system that's actually scheduled to grow in terms of the value of its benefits over time. So largely speaking, the debate in Social Security is over how to achieve that balance, whether we cut benefits a little bit, whether we raise taxes a little bit. But for the most part, the basic structure is going to be there. We will be providing benefits to people far into the future. And the only difference might be that it might not be quite at the level of benefits that are currently promised, or it might not be quite at the current tax rate that people are paying in now, because the imbalance has to be taken care of.
I wish that our president and our other elected officials essentially said what Jean just said, because it is true that younger workers don't think Social Security will be there for them, and yet the whole idea of the system is to provide, in addition to cash benefits, security, peace of mind. So I hope this show, at the end of this show, they have confidence that they will get their benefits. It is a question of, as long as the American people support this program, and they do highly, the program will be there for future generations.
I think it's an incredibly popular program and incredibly valuable as a public good to provide that social safety net and that assurance of some amount of retirement security. And I think that even though today's kids, my own kids, may not have much faith that the program will be there, I think that they want the program to be there for them, and that all families want the program to be there, not just for current retirees, but for my generation and my kids' generation.
So this is really an important topic to help people figure out what their future is going to be. It's not a hopeless picture by any means at this point. So let's talk about some of the concerns that people have about the Social Security program. One is the long-term funding gap. Another is how it contributes to the federal deficit. And then there's some concern about the purpose and the structure. So we'll get into the purpose and the structure later, but I want to talk a little bit about the long-term funding gap for starters.
It's a very important question because it's very complicated and it's easily, it's very confusing. The fact is that Social Security is a pension fund with its own assets in a trust fund, which you mentioned, just as private employers put assets away in their private pension plans. It's a very conservatively managed program. It projects out 75 years. Every year, trustees report out 75 years, which is much longer than private pensions project. Most other countries don't project that far. But the idea is to make sure that those benefits will be there for those younger workers. For the last, since the mid-1990s, the projections have been showing, as Jean said, a manageable shortfall, still decades away, but it is something that should be addressed. It's about, just to give you a sense of the size, there's been a lot of talk about the Bush tax cuts for the very wealthy, the top 2%, whether those should be extended or not extended. If those, that's about the size of the shortfall. If those tax cuts, instead of being extended, were expired and dedicated to Social Security, next year's trust fund would show it was in balance for 75 years.
So, and can you, people sometimes refer to the Bush tax cuts and it being similar, but somehow it's hard for me to grasp how much that is, or can you put something around that?
The best way to measure that is by a percentage of gross domestic product, which is all our goods and services. And it's somewhere about 0.7% of gross domestic product is the shortfall.
I see. And
let me say, I guess another way to think about it, and this isn't the best solution, but it's often described in terms of taxable payroll. In other words, right now, you talked about the amount withheld from wages, that's 6.2%. If that were increased by a percentage point on employers and a percentage point on employees, that would also eliminate the shortfall. That's the size.
I see. And when you say 6.2%, that's how much employees pay, and then the employer also pays.
Matches it. We're actually having a so-called holiday, and it's gone down to 4.2, but normally, and once that expires, it's 6.2 on employers and 6.2 on employees for the old age survivors and disability insurance.
And the holiday is for the employee side?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's now 4.2 that expires the end of this year.
I see. All right. And what is driving this gap? A lot of people say people are living longer or the baby boomers are retiring. Is that what's causing this?
You know, it's a little bit of a complicated answer. It was put into balance last in 1983. And at that time, it was projecting imbalance through 2057. And of course, there haven't been new baby boomers since 1983. They were all born in the 50s and 60s. Some of it is the inequality of wage growth, so that wages at the top end have grown so much faster, and there is a cap, so that's taken effect. Some is that more and more of our wages go into health insurance, and that's not paid for out of Social Security, is not assessed against those wages. So there are a variety of factors, there are a variety of ways to characterize it. People are living longer, but the actuaries, of course, take that into account. So that also plays a role.
I'll give you a shorthand way of looking at this, although I agree with all the items that Nancy mentioned, is we often talk about the number of workers that are available to support each retiree, and basically demographics have changed dramatically. For one thing, people are living longer, which, by the way, I would not say is actually necessarily the same thing as aging. If we're living longer and that's accompanied by better health, we're really not having a lot more people who are old in the sense of being near to death. However, we also had a lower birth rate starting about 1965. That's the end of the baby boom population. That lower birth rate does reduce the number of workers available. There are fewer younger people coming along to support old people. And so when you look at this worker to retiree ratio, it's dropped over time. At one point it used to be 4-to-1, now it's down to a little more than 3-to-1, and it's scheduled to go down to about 2-to-1. So that demographic shift does have implications for how many people are available to pay taxes to support the people that are in retirement. And of course, it's all influenced by the fact that over very long periods of time, people have greatly extended the number of years in which that they're receiving benefits. And so we do have to deal with that demographic issue. And although we're mainly talking about Social Security today, I want to be clear, I think the demographic issue is in many ways a bigger one than just the Social Security issue, in the sense that if you have fewer workers paying taxes, it's not just Social Security taxes, it's fewer workers paying income taxes and everything else. We can come back to that. But that's my summary of what's forcing us to sort of have to make decisions about Social Security is this shift in demographics, although it's by far not the only issue affecting the balances.
Okay, so well, let's talk a little bit about the trust fund portion of Social Security, because people also talk about that from different views. So Social Security has run surpluses up till around now, and that money has been put in a Social Security trust fund. But that trust fund, the way that works or where that money is right now, can you explain where that is?
Sure. You know, a trust fund, just as if you set up a trust fund for your children, or a corporation X sets up a pension trust fund for its employees, it is a legal entity in which there are trustees holding the interest for, in this case, American workers and their families. So that was set up in 1939. The Congress has said that, and of course, whenever Social Security has run a surplus, as you said in your introduction, most of the money goes right out to pay benefits. But there are often surpluses, and there have been surpluses since 1984, and actually will continue into the 2020s. So whenever it runs a surplus, it invests the money. It doesn't put it under a mattress. It's got to put it somewhere. And what Congress has decreed from the beginning, that it be put in the safest investment on earth, which are Treasury bonds backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. Now that's where the confusion comes in, because the plan sponsor is the federal government, and the money is being loaned to the federal government, but they are separate entities. There have been proposals to invest some of those assets in the stock market, but that's quite controversial and not as safe as the stock market. So these are Treasury bonds, just like the ones China purchases, or if you and I purchase them for our children. They are obligations backed by the full faith and credit that have legal standing.
So yeah, Diane, do you want to talk a little bit about this? Because I know you might look at it a little bit differently.
Well, the problem with the Social Security Trust Fund is it's really more of an accounting concept than an actual real stock of assets sitting in a vault somewhere. It would be great if it worked just like a private sector pension system might, where the assets were still being stored there and saved. But the fact is we didn't put the Social Security Trust Fund in a lockbox, unfortunately. I actually personally like the idea of doing something like that. But what happened instead was, for all these years that Social Security has been running surpluses and basically accumulating more in the trust fund, the rest of the federal budget has borrowed from it. And the Treasury assets that the federal government actually issues in order to be able to spend more than it takes in revenue is not part of what is held in the trust fund. Instead, the trust fund has been used, the surpluses in the trust fund have been used to reduce the overall budget deficit in the federal government, what's called the unified budget deficit. So that's the problem, is that we've sort of been borrowing from Social Security all along, and yes, there are legal IOUs in there. But we're now faced with the fact that Social Security is now starting to run cash deficits, so that Social Security will no longer be an offset to the large deficits in the rest of the federal budget. And meanwhile, we don't have a plan to get the rest of the federal budget in order. And so, you know, we want to be able to honor our commitments to Social Security, and they do have the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. But we've got a lot of work to do in the rest of the federal budget to make sure that we are able to honor those commitments.
I think that, in my view, the trust fund discussion actually confuses the debate rather than helps it. I mean, one can come out different views about it. For most of its history, Social Security basically took in $1 and paid out roughly $1. For a brief period of time, when the baby boomers swelled the workforce, Social Security was taking in $1 and paying out 90 cents. So there was a bit of a buildup, so-called, in the trust fund. But as Diane said, the 10 cents of savings we did in Social Security was offset by 20 cents of spending elsewhere. Now we're at a point where we're back to basically roughly taking in $1 and spending $1, but we're quickly going to a world where for every $1 we take in, we're going to spend $1.30. And so when you could say, well, in the interim, can we spend down this money in the trust fund. Some people say yes, some people say no, because all that means is the income taxpayer has to make up for what Social Security doesn't. But either way, by the time you get out there a few years, you've got $1.30 being paid out for $1 being paid in. And at that point in time, the trust funds aren't there, so the trust fund debate's superfluous to that. The question is, how do we move, as we're increasingly paying out more than we're taking in, how do we move towards achieving that balance? So does the trust fund help the debate? My view is it doesn't really help that much discuss how to deal with that trend where benefits are constantly rising relative to taxes.
Right, and so I know you have something to say about that. I just want to just check out, when you're saying for every dollar that's paid in, $1.30 is paid out, are you talking about for the federal government or for the Social Security program?
In Social Security, it's not there yet. Right now, for every dollar paid in, roughly $1 is paid out. But it's moving to a world where roughly for every dollar paid in, say it's about $1.30 would be paid out.
Just because
so today it's $1 for $1. In another 10 years, maybe it's $1.10 will be paid out rather than $1. Another 20 years, it'll be $1.20 paid out. Because what's happening is more and more of these, demographically, more and more of these baby boomers are retiring. They're not being replaced at a faster rate by younger people. And so the rate of payments keep rising relative to the taxes.
Okay. But let me just give Nancy a chance.
And this is really a crucial distinction here, because if a private pension had trillions of dollars in treasury obligations, you wouldn't say that that was worthless, or you wouldn't call it an IOU. You don't look on the business page and see what treasuries are selling at, and it doesn't say IOU. The Congress made a decision in 1983 in anticipation of the baby boom retiring. Up until then, Social Security had been, for the most part, current funded, and it still is. That's the money going in, money going out. But to allow a small amount of the fund to be advance funded. And so this fund built up. The American people saw their money deducted for Social Security. And it's really, I think, a fraud on the American people to now say, oh, well, that money is gone. I mean, the money was invested in other, just the way when China lends it, the money is invested. And that money was spent too. That money you could call an IOU. But unless we're talking about defaulting on China, I don't know why we would default on American workers before we defaulted on OPEC nations or other, even enemies of this country that hold treasury bonds.
Well, I agree that we have to honor those commitments just as much as, just because that it's the government loaning to itself doesn't mean that it's something we can't honor. I was just going to say that for every dollar that other programs pay out, they don't take in any amount of money. So, I mean, just to keep things in perspective, the larger federal budget is a much bigger problem than Social Security is. And we have to remember that Social Security was actually making money for the federal government during most of its history.
So basically, whichever way you look at it, I mean, so there is the whole trust fund issue that's kind of confusing, and that figuring out how the federal government is going to pay that is a federal government problem, and that's a concern to people. But Social Security in and of itself maybe didn't cause that problem, but it's got its own issues as well. And one thing that people tend to agree on, no matter how you look at it, is that the sooner we talk about what we're going to do about Social Security, the better. Why is that? What's the advantage of sooner rather than later?
Well, I think one advantage is what we talked about before about younger workers, that this program is supposed to provide peace of mind, and to have again, this confusion about the deficit, and to say Social Security is going bankrupt or running out of money or it's not going to be there for you, really undercuts one of the primary functions of this program, which, as I say, is peace of mind.
Okay, great. So, well, we're going to have to take a short break, and then when we'll come back, we'll continue this discussion and we'll talk more about the purpose of Social Security. Stay with us.
You don't have to knock yourself out to prevent diabetes. Get real. If you're over 45 and overweight, you can prevent diabetes. Lose 5 to 7% of your body weight, get 30 minutes of physical activity 5 days a week, and eat healthy. Take the first step. Talk to your health care provider. Prevent diabetes.
Every day, computers help our lives and businesses run smoothly. And every day, they're potential targets. Viruses, spyware, and scams are relentlessly being updated, making it easier for hackers and thieves to steal information and control your computer. Protect yourself. Get in the habit of keeping your cybersecurity up to date. Learn how at StaySafeOnline.org today.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
Welcome back. So in our first segment, we talked about the long-range funding gap of the Social Security program itself. But there's also been talk about the connection between the federal deficit and the Social Security program. And I just want to take a minute to give our guests to speak to that issue, just so you have some understanding of how some people make that connection. But as you'll see, not everybody makes that connection. So let's start with you, Diane, and talk to viewers about the federal deficit and Social Security. What's the connection?
Well, for years, Social Security was actually contributing positively to the federal budget balance because it was taking in more in revenue than it was paying out in benefits. But we've gotten to the point now where the baby boomers have started to retire, and we're getting into a cash flow situation where taxes are falling short. Taxes within Social Security are falling short of benefits being paid out. So it's part of the deficit problem in general because it contributes to the size of the federal budget deficit overall. So for every year that Social Security runs a cash flow deficit, that annual amount adds to the annual federal budget deficit. So it's pretty simple math in that regard.
Right. In the broader budget today, we're paying out total benefits of the federal government about $31,000 a household, and we're collecting about $19,000 in taxes.
Is that for Social Security?
No, that's for everything. Social Security, it's about a balance. It's about even. The benefits and the taxes are about even. So certainly the shortfalls that are in the current budget are not due to shortfalls in Social Security. But as you move out into the future, the benefits under Social Security and Medicare and benefits for elderly programs in general rise fairly dramatically. About half of it's due to demographics we talked about earlier, and about half of it's due to healthcare cost. And regardless of whether you do it within Social Security or you do it within Medicare, or you do it through income taxes, you've got to pay for that rising level of benefits. And to me, that's the connection between the broader issue and the Social Security issue. It's not necessarily that it calls you to do Social Security reform, and Social Security reform has to take place today for that particular reason, but Social Security is a part of this broader mix. It's a part of our entire benefit structure. It's a part of our entire tax structure that's basically out of balance.
And Nancy, what's your view on this?
Well, with all due respect to my colleagues, I have a quite different view. Social Security does not add a penny to the deficit. By law, Social Security can only pay benefits if it has sufficient income to cover the costs. If it ever got to the point where it didn't have sufficient income, those benefits would be cut across the board automatically. Without action of Congress whatsoever. So it should be dealt with as it has been historically on its own terms as a pension fund to make sure it's in balance, separate, apart, after we've dealt with the overall federal deficit.
Okay, so that gives you some idea of the issues. There's the long-term funding gap with Social Security itself, and then there's the flow of income versus benefits paid that concerns some people about the federal budget. There's much more we could talk about to clarify that, but it also gets very confusing. So I would like to at least give you a taste of that and now move forward to, because no matter which of these views you think about, the solution is still the same. People still agree that we need to talk about the long-term funding solutions for this program. So that's what I'd like to move forward at this point. Now, the other thing that happens is that people tend to jump to solutions, but I want to take a step back and talk about, first of all, what is the purpose of Social Security? Why do we have it in the first place? And is the purpose the same today as it was before? And is it the same that we want it to be in the future? So right now, people basically talk about Social Security as providing retirement income for people, as well as providing protection against poverty in old age. So is that still the right purpose for Social Security today?
Well, Social Security was founded in 1930s, acts in 1935 and 38, in part because of very strong concerns about elderly poverty, which was well above poverty levels for the rest of the population. There was also concern in particular because we were in an industrial age and we had a lot of people retiring but without very little in the way of retirement security income. So I'd say in some sense both those concerns were there when Social Security was present. And the issue today isn't to me so much whether it's just an anti-poverty program, which I think is very hard to administer because it's very hard if people decide to work or not work to decide who's poor because they're capable of working, not capable of working. To me, the issue is how do you get the right balance of those purposes today? So how do you spend money at the margin so it really best serves various purposes? And in part, Social Security's done a pretty good job at reducing poverty. It also provides a lot of benefits now to higher income people that really are not needed necessarily for anti-poverty purposes, aren't even needed necessarily for a minimum level of retirement income. And so then the issue is, do you want to keep raising taxes for that purpose? Or, for instance, do you want to spend money on other issues? Like, in my mind, how do I want to spend more money on things like education? And that's where the broader issue comes in. So bottom line is it served both purposes. And the real issue is how much do you want it to serve both purposes? How much money do you want to spend for those two purposes?
Mm-hmm. Social Security is the concept behind Social Security is thoroughly modern. The concept in 1935 is the same concept today, which is when people are dependent on wages for their livelihood, they need insurance against the loss of those wages. They can be lost because of unemployment. We have unemployment insurance that was also part of the 1935 Act. They can become disabled, they can die leaving dependents, they can retire. The idea behind means-tested welfare is that as long as we have poverty, we need to help people who are impoverished. But the idea behind insurance is to prevent poverty in the first place. So Social Security is a universal program. Its benefits are extremely modest, just $13,000 on average for all retirees, yet vitally important to virtually the vast majority of Americans who get them. So it's done a very good job over the years at preventing poverty, alleviating poverty, but that's only part of the goal. It provides a foundation to every American so that when they get to the point of old age and they cease to work, they have a foundation on which to build.
Mm-hmm. So, and what about Jean's point that it's providing a foundation sometimes for people that have already provided a foundation?
That's really not true. 2/3 of seniors rely on Social Security for half or more of their income. When you talk about the high income, because the benefits are so low, nobody's getting rich off Social Security. When you talk about high income for tax purposes, we tend to talk about people earning more than $250,000. When we talk about seniors, we talk about people earning or having incomes of $50,000. The average income of seniors from all sources is about $18,000, the median income in this country, so that Social Security provides this minimal benefit for everyone.
So my qualification there is I actually agree the annual cash benefit per existing retired worker is fairly modest. What has happened, though, is we've had a lot of expansions over the years for a whole bunch of purposes. I know we want to talk a lot about Medicare, but to the extent we keep adding on a lot of health benefits, which are much more generous for the elderly than the non-elderly have to pay for that. So that affects the distribution of well-being between the elderly and non-elderly. We've also added on a huge number of years of support. So when we calculate the lifetime value of Social Security benefits, that is, what would you need in a 401k account or an individual retirement account to pay for your Social Security benefits? For an average wage couple today, it's about $550,000. If you add on Medicare, it gets up to about $900,000. If you add on the value of long-term care insurance, which is implicitly there for anybody who goes into a nursing home in an extended period of time, basically an average couple retiring today, not already retired, has about $1 million package of benefits. And in another 30 years, that grows to about $1 million to $1.5 million worth of benefits. And so that's what I mean by being generous. A lot of years of support, a lot of add-ons like Medicare, a lot of things like spousal and survivor benefits that are not adequate for low and moderate income people, but are fairly generous at high income levels. And so it's all these things added together that, to me, make us question whether $1 million isn't enough in elderly benefits when we're cutting back and crimping on things like education. It's not the annual cash benefit for an average worker retired today. I agree, that's only fairly modest.
Yeah, if we focus just on Social Security,
Right.
that the benefit, the cost to the society is essentially a flat line. It's about 6% of gross domestic product. Benefits are actually going down under current law. So we've got healthcare issues, private as well as public, that are rising very rapidly. That we have to deal with, but that, to my mind, that's a separate discussion. Social Security really does as good is more as important as ever as it was in 1935 when it was enacted.
So I just want to. So Diane, you're saying it's important. Or I'm sorry, Nancy. You're saying that it's the benefits are important. Retirement income. It's a modest amount of support. It's a pretty flat line. But it sounds like what Jean is saying is maybe we need to look at that. The income is important, but the amount of
Social Security benefits, if you want to take it by itself, ever since its beginning, with rare exception of, say, World War II, has constantly grown as a percent of GDP of our national income from 1940 to 2010, and it's scheduled forever to continue growing, although at more modest paces after about 2035 or 40. It's forever absorbed a higher proportion of our income, and at some point we can say, okay, I think we've done a good job here. Maybe we need to focus on some other things.
So it's just worth re-examining. Diane, I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
I mean, higher benefits, or the benefits of Social Security are certainly a positive in people's lives. And I think that there's no question that they help even high-income people benefit from the modest amount of income that Social Security provides. The question is it beneficial to people? Is that benefit worth its cost? Because we're now living in a world where even within the Social Security system, we're concerned about the mismatch between benefits and costs. So we have to start asking these questions. If we live with this budget constraint, how are we going to bring it more in line? And so it's not a question of is it helpful to high-income people or not, and it certainly is. The question is our society willing to cover the cost of providing those benefits to high-income people?
And this is by definition a political question. How much do we want to spend? And poll after poll after poll shows the American people are united, whether you identify with the Tea Party movement or have a union member in the household or a Democrat or Republican. The polls show overwhelmingly the American people think these benefits should not be cut. If anything, they should be increased. When asked, are they willing to pay more to preserve the program, they say yes. So that it is a question, I think, exactly, but it's one of values and how we want to spend our collectively as a society. How do we want to, how much goes to the public sector, how much gets spent?
Great, okay. So now I do want to move on to, now that we've talked a little bit about the purpose and some questions that maybe need to be continually re-examined, but assuming that some tweaks need to be made in the program, there are different ways to do that. Really, you can reduce benefits or increase revenues. So I want to talk about a few of those options, and one of the topics that comes up a lot is about raising the payroll tax cap. Currently, wages over the cap of $106,800 are not subject to the Social Security payroll tax. So there's a cap there at how much people pay. And some people want to raise that tax cap. Why is that?
Well, I mean, mechanically, it's an easy thing to do. And it makes, the fact that there is that cap makes the payroll tax in isolation, the tax part of Social Security, a regressive tax in that it collects smaller portions of income from people over that cap. So, you know, from a fairness perspective, some people don't like the fact that Social Security taxes are structured very differently from our income tax system. So there might be fairness issues in terms of tax policy that would warrant lifting the cap. And obviously, it's an easy way to raise more revenue, to just lift the cap. You don't necessarily have to eliminate the cap. Some people have proposed just increasing it, but not getting rid of it entirely.
So do you all think it's a good idea?
Yeah, absolutely. There's even aside from the revenue that it brings in, there is a policy reason for raising it. Congress set it at a level that they meant to have cover about 90% of wages nationwide. But because we saw such rapid growth in wages of the highest end, it's based on an average increase is how it's increased. And because averages can be deceiving, the incomes of the highest end have grown so much more rapidly that it's not where Congress intended. So it should be raised. There is a question of whether some people talk about scrapping the cap. It's very popular among Americans. Only 6% of all workers earn above that $106,800. Most people don't even know there is that maximum because they never reach it. So I think there's absolute policy justification for raising it or even scrapping it.
My one caveat,
yes.
and I'm not opposed to raising the cap, my one caveat, which gets back to this issue of the broader budget debate, is on almost every part of the budget, people are talking about raising taxes on this same group of people. And so I think one has to think about how they all relate to each other, as well as my broader issue. If I'm going to raise taxes, which I think we do have to do to get the budget in order, do I want to raise taxes to spend more on this program, or would I rather raise taxes to spend more on things like education? If you do it within the narrow Social Security debate, you're raising it to spend on Social Security. And so even though I am not opposed to raising the wage cap, I do have questions whether that's where and how we want to spend that money.
And what about, there's sort of a principle in Social Security that the tax is based on how much you get. And I mean, I don't want to get into the technical things, but if the cap is raised, doesn't it kind of violate that principle that it's not?
It's a very good, since the beginning, the principle of Social Security is that the higher, it's a very cleverly designed system. It balancing both these concerns about anti-poverty adequacy at the low end, but fairness to all contributors. So the more a person contributes, the higher in dollar amount the benefit the person gets, but not as high a rate of return. It's a kind of complicated concept, so it's very delicately balanced. If you raise the cap and continued to pay benefits based on those increases, you still would make a major dent. If you scrapped the cap and paid benefits on however much was paid in, you'd still close about 95% of the shortfall. So you could do it. If you scrap the cap and kept benefits exactly where they are now, you'd actually bring in more revenue than you'd need for Social Security.
So wait, if you scrap the cap and pay the
benefits under the same benefit formula.
So if people pay more, their benefits would be adjusted?
Exactly.
That would close 95%?
Because it's a progressive benefit formula, which means that it's a higher rate of return. Understanding that people at the low end have less discretionary income. The formula is set up so that your first dollars paid in, you get a higher rate of return. So those final dollars, over $106,800, you're only getting about 15% return on it. And that's why you're bringing in a lot more revenue than you're paying out.
I mean, there are a lot of issues here. Higher income people have income in the form of capital income, so that's not going to be subject to a higher cap. So it mainly hits sort of wage earners. For partnerships where they don't distinguish between capital income and wage income, they get hit worse than people who can put their money in a corporation. If you totally scrap the cap, you're going to have people, and you don't adjust the benefit formula, you're going to have some people getting $1 million benefits, which would reduce support for the system. So there are a lot of issues on raising the cap. So most people when they talk about raising it some, but not
getting rid of
scrapping it.
Right, okay, great. Well, we're going to take another short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about raising the retirement age.
Should I be planning better for retirement?
Does Medicare cover tattoo removal?
Relax, Tony. Go to firstgov.gov. They've got all the answers.
Wouldn't it be great if all government services were right there?
Hello? Patty, I've decided to follow your lead and file for Social Security benefits online. But Kath, aren't you back in Zanzibar? I just got on my laptop and went to socialsecurity.gov. It took less than 15 minutes. Wow, you are a miracle worker. Well, cheers, Patty. I'm off to film a baby rhino. Baby rhino?
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease, contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website at www.americanheart.org.
Don't be a stranger. Join me, Mike Delaney, Wednesday evenings at 10 o'clock for Simply Sinatra, a weekly celebration of the music from the chairman of the board, Mr. Francis Albert Sinatra. That's Simply Sinatra, Wednesdays at 10 p.m. on WEBR, Cox Channel 37.
Welcome back to Town Square, where we've been discussing the future of Social Security. We've been talking about a couple of options, and now we're going to talk about raising the retirement age. So, Jean, could you start off with that? And first of all, just tell people, what is the retirement age for Social Security?
Well, it's confusing to most people. Social Security has technically two ages it calls retirement age. It has something called the earliest retirement age, or early retirement age, which has been 62 since the late 50s and early 60s. It has what's called a normal retirement age. That's when one gets a full benefit. That originally was 65. People often recognize the 65 number. It's now 66 for people, and it's going up to 67 in a number of years into the future. What that means is that if you retire, say, at 62, your discount, your reduction in benefits is even greater because you have 5 years of reduction now. If the normal retirement age is 67, than it was when it used to be 65. So the increase in this normal retirement age is like a cut in benefits if you retire at the same age. But what I'd really like to get into is the broader issue about people getting people to work longer, which is, to me, is the biggest issue in the retirement age issue. If people would retire today for the same number of years they did when Social Security was first established, they would actually be retiring at age 75. That is, people when Social Security was first established in 1940, on average retired about age 68. They had about a 14-year life expectancy. If people today would retire with about a 14-year life expectancy, they'd be retiring at age 75. You go out another 50 years in the future, they'd be retiring at age 80. So people have been living longer and longer and longer and getting more and more years of benefits. And then when the earliest retirement age was made available, people started retiring earlier. That's gradually shifting, by the way. So shifting in the sense that finally people are starting to retire a little later. They were retiring earlier and earlier, and in the last 10 or 15 years, they've been starting to retire a little later. On average, they retire about age 63, 64 now. But that still means that there's a huge number of years of benefits. For a couple, for instance, that would retire at 62, that has just a normal life expectancy, one or the other of the couple, that is the longer living the two, would expect to get benefits about 27 years. That's because the average person would live about around 20, but one of them is liable to live more than the average. So it's 27 years for a couple now. It's going up towards 30 years in the future. So one of the concerns is just that with that many people retiring for that long, we're really reducing the revenue cost of the system. Okay, so that's the budget issue. But even if there was,
I'm sorry, we're reducing.
Well, you have fewer workers.
Okay.
More and more people retire. We're soon going to a world where about a third of the population is going to be on Social Security. That's a lot, not only a lot of beneficiaries to support, but it's a lot fewer workers in the workforce to pay the taxes, to support Social Security, to support Medicare, to support education programs, whatever else. And so by encouraging more and more people to retire earlier and earlier relative to when they expect to die, we've really converted the system, in my view, to a middle-age retirement system. And that gets back to our earlier discussion about where at the margin do I want to spend government dollars. I'm not convinced giving Nancy or myself or Diane or you, Don, a 25th or a 30th year in retirement is a priority for what we should be doing as a nation. So that's one reason I want to deal with it at that level. But there's a second issue, which is within Social Security. Suppose there was no imbalance in Social Security at all. By having so many years of retirement benefits, we're really threatening the well-being of the truly owed. So a lot of people go into retirement in their early 60s, and they think they're well off. 25 years later, which one or the other of a couple is liable to live, those nursing costs have gone up, those health costs, the ones they have to pay out of pocket, those health costs have gone up. I think we're actually threatening a lot of our current elderly in terms of their well-being. And so there are a lot of changes in the retirement age, I won't go into the details, that won't reduce lifetime benefits at all, but they do a lot more to encourage people to work later so that their benefits, for their sake, are concentrated more in old age when they're really going to need them.
Okay.
And we don't have this middle age support.
So what are other thoughts about
there's
that?
a lot of confusion around this issue. Raising the retirement age often sounds like encouraging is a work incentive, encouraging people to work longer, or sometimes people think of it, oh, it's fair because people didn't live as long and now they're living longer. I think I think we all think that people should have the choice to work longer. We should enforce our age discrimination laws. We should provide all kinds of incentives for people to live. We should to work longer. We should educate people about the financial consequences of retiring early. On the other hand, raising the retirement age in Social Security is indistinguishable mathematically from an across-the-board benefit cut. Because Social Security really has a band of ages. You can retire as early as 62 and any year after that. And for any year between 62 and 70, you have an adjustment that makes it fair. It's to make it neutral. So there's no subsidy for retiring early. There's no penalty
you get the same
for
amount
it.
of money, basically.
Basically over an average life. So that benefits are already too low. They are extremely modest. As I said before, $13,000 across the board. To cut them further, I think, is poor policy. I'm all in favor of encouraging people to work longer. The other
Well, let me just ask you, though,
Sure.
about Jean's point about that, but should the government be paying for people to be in retirement for 27 years or whatever, a third of their life?
You know what, it's an insurance program, and it's a little bit of a lot of people think, and I've heard a lot of sort of urban myth that people used to die at 62 and now they're living, everybody's living. Our life expectancies have increased, but only modestly. In fact, for the last 25 years for lower income women, they've declined. So there's a lot of misinformation about that. The point is, it's insurance replacing wages, and it replaces, less than 50% of wages, 30%, 26% for the higher income people. The point is, you may only live 1 year after retirement. You may live to be 120. But the idea is to have a guaranteed source of benefits and one we can afford. And this, again, it's a political question, and the polls show the American people do not want to see the retirement age increased.
Well, it does have an impact on people's lives, Jean, so it would really kind of change.
Yeah, I understand. This puts me in the category of the person who's worried about cut. But I want to be clear. We're talking about a continually rising level of benefits. You're scheduled, Dawn, to get a lot more benefits than I am. I was scheduled to get a lot more benefits than my parents. So the system has built-in growth, both because of the way it's indexed over time, so people get, every generation is scheduled to get more annual benefits, and it's also indexed, but if you don't adjust retirement age, it's indexed so that because you're expected to live longer than I am on average, your benefits go up too. So what we're really talking about is just simply lowering this rate of growth of benefits a little bit. We're not actually talking about cutting benefits. We're talking about lowering the rate of growth of benefits. And so let's take one of the recent commissions. It said that they would gradually increase this normal retirement age. Remember, I'm mainly concerned about the early one, but it said let's increase this normal retirement age to 69. So it had a 2-year increase in this so-called normal retirement age. This was over a period of time in which people were expected to live 3 years longer. So 3 more years of benefits was going to be offset by the fact that they'd only get 1 more year of benefit if you did some of this adjustment. So let's be clear, we're talking about mainly lowering the rate of growth of benefits so that we can concentrate benefits more on when the needs are greatest.
Okay. So Diane, what are your thoughts on raising the retirement age and these issues?
Well, let's try to end on a positive note on this retirement age issue. We're so used to in the federal budget talking about people getting older as a bad thing. So with regards to the retirement age, I actually am in favor of raising the retirement age simply because I believe it's part of our economy's productive capacity. There are a lot of people there that can afford to work longer and who want to work longer. It's not like we're forcing them to work longer, and they certainly are willing to work longer even without more generous benefits in the later part of their working years. So if we can increase the working age years relative to the retirement years, then aging doesn't have to be a net negative in terms of pressures on the federal budget.
Great, thanks. So we've been focusing on the fiscal issues, the financial issue of Social Security, but I know there's lots of other ideas about how the program could be reformed, other issues, structural issues that people are concerned about. So I'd like to give you each a chance to talk about those. Do you want to start, Nancy?
I'm happy to start. Yeah, it's important to remember that all of the discussion about shortfalls and deficits is really a means to an end. The end is to provide economic security to the American people. And it is a question that we all together, through our government, decide what level of support do we want to provide collectively for economic security. I believe that given what's happened with 401ks, where we've seen the fall off in the value, what's happened with private sector defined traditional pension plans, which are disappearing, home equity, all of those sorts of things. The one pillar that stood firm is Social Security. It really works, and it's extremely efficient, much more efficient than private sector plans, returning more than 99 cents of every dollar in benefits. We should be increasing those benefits. We can do it targeted, we can do it across the board, but I think we should be talking about how to increase the Americans' economic security.
Diane, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I also believe that the role of Social Security in retirement security is a very important one, and we need to preserve that. At the same time, I think that we do need to think of Social Security in the larger federal budget context, because we're going to need the resources to support the program. And I think we should be looking beyond Social Security even for those. If Social Security is such an important program for us, we need to be mindful of what parts of the program are really important to us as a nation, and how can we strengthen those parts of the program, maybe pare back on parts of the program that aren't essential, that we don't feel is an essential role of government, and therefore, you know, make the whole federal budget more sound and more capable, the economy better able to handle the demands that we'll have in the future as the population ages.
And how about you, Jean?
I agree very much with my colleagues. I would add private pension reform. I would do a lot of things in Social Security that are totally independent of the deficit within the Social Security. I would try to fix what I believe to be a very strong discrimination against single heads of households who pay into the system but get no spousal and survivor benefits. They pay for them, they don't get anything out of it. I would actually strengthen the anti-poverty protections. I would actually make people better off. I would do a lot to concentrate benefits more in old age rather than younger ages, independently of whether there's any shortfall in the system.
Great, wow. Well, thank you all. We've come to the end of our time together, but I think this has been a really good discussion, and I have enjoyed it immensely. Just to summarize, I think we all, or you all, agreed that there is a future for Social Security, that you expect it to be around, and that the public wants it to be around. It's just that there is a long-term funding gap, and the sooner that we can talk about that, the better, but there's no point to rush. It's better to do it right than just to get it done. We also talked about, stepped back a little bit to talk about the purpose of Social Security, and is it still where we want it to be, and there are some interesting questions there. And then we talked about two specific options, raising the payroll tax cap and the retirement age. And those aren't the only two options that are out there, but the way that we explored it and talked about different points of view, I think, is a model that people can use to explore some of the other options that are out there. And throughout the show, I think that you tried to understand each other's view and that there was some engagement in different points of view. So in the end, I hope it's conversations like this one that will help determine the future of Social Security. So once again, to each of you, to my guests, to Nancy, the co-chair of Strengthen Social Security Campaign, to Diane Lim Rogers from the Concord Coalition, and also a writer and blogger at economistmom.com, which I encourage people to check out, and to Jean Sturley from the Urban Institute, who also has a column at governmentwedeserve.org, which is very interesting. I encourage people to check that out as well. I thank you all for joining me here in the studio, for being a part of this. And I especially thank you for the work that you're doing to help people really think about the solutions to the Social Security problem. If you have any comments about the show or suggestions for a future show, please email me, Dawn Becker at townsquaretv@yahoo.com. Thanks for watching, and see you around the square.